This is incredible. Ukraine has struck at Russia's nuclear aviation. The SBU carried out the special operation Web 2 and the Saki airfield. A key base for Russian aircraft has been blown up and engulfed in flames. The SBU has once again delivered a devastating blow to Russia's nuclear aviation.
No one is allowed near there, not even people. It's useless putting out fire.
This is an airfield, it's not a small town, it's an airfield.
Drones attacked the Saki airfield in occupied Crimea, Russia's key airbase for operations over the Black Sea. 5 Russian fighter jets were damaged at the Saki airfield. 1 aircraft was completely destroyed.
It's very frightening.
We were told to gather our documents. There might be an evacuation. The shells that are loaded into the planes are exploding. Since they're lying there in a chaotic manner, it's unclear they could fly off in any direction.
A Su-30SM was destroyed, another one was damaged, and most importantly, 3 Su-24s, carriers of nuclear weapons, were hit. A series of explosions occurred in occupied Crimea. An aviation munitions depot was blown up, the base is engulfed in flames, there is evacuation and panic, and the losses amount to tens of millions of dollars. This is the strategic destruction of Russia's nuclear infrastructure. At the same time, there was a strike on the Frolova railway station. Arkita is on fire.
That was a serious hit, guys.
The relay cabinets were destroyed and traffic has been halted. In Sochi, there's a fire at the oil depot in Adler, near the airport. It has ceased operations. What's burning over there?
The airport.
A drone strike deprived the airport of fuel.
They hit the oil depot basically, and once again the garages, those poor garages got hit again.
Flights are being diverted to alternate airfields. In Kurgan, a gas distribution station is on fire and evacuation is underway. In the USSR, gas pipelines were attacked in Siberia, the Moscow region, and central Russia, including the route to Central Asia. The airports in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Volgograd, and Tambov are closed. At Pulkovo, there are hundreds of flight delays. The Russia's murderers are praying with priests. You remember, only the sound of bells can save you from drones. Church bells. There are 300-kilometer traffic jams at the Crimean Bridge. Manual inspections take up to 7 hours. The FSB is jamming internet communications. Russia is in a logistical dead end. This is no longer defense. This is an offensive. Ukraine is striking accurately and systematically, and effectively. We'll discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Right now.
Greetings, I wish everyone good health. Roman.
Lvovich, top events. SBU special operations strike on Russia's nuclear aviation. We attacked more than 5 aircraft. Tell us more about this.
The security service, they have a special center there that deals with long-range strategic drones. They attacked Saky. It's clear, we've talked about Saki with you several times already. Novofedorivka is nearby. It's the main depot supporting Russia's naval aviation, but the aircraft themselves are stationed specifically at Saki. It's a naval aviation airfield. Naturally, there are Su-24s, Su-30s, and some helicopters there, which, by the way, were supposed to intercept these drones, but failed to do so. As Army Aviation sometimes reports, the commander just couldn't do it for Putin. That's the kind of bad luck that happened. 5 aircraft were hit, 1 destroyed. Out of the 5, 1 was completely destroyed, a Su-30. Another Su-30 was damaged, and 3 Su-24s were also damaged. They really can be carriers of nuclear weapons as well.
Roman Igorovich, so the SBU struck. 5 fighter jets at the Saki airfield were destroyed, and another Su-30SM was damaged. 3 Su-24 aircraft capable of carrying nuclear warheads were destroyed. An aviation munitions depot was blown up. Saki is Russia's key air base on the Black Sea. It has been put out of commission. Against the backdrop of Donald Trump's nuclear threats and 2 nuclear submarines approaching Russia, or have already approached, the fact that we are once again attacking nuclear-capable aviation in occupied Crimea. This is an important signal overall. Su-30...
Su-24, even a frontline bomber, tactical aviation, but nevertheless it can carry a nuclear payload. So in that case, it means this is a kind of parallel strike. A parallel strike along with informational, at the very least, informational pressure on Russia from the United States. Why informational? Because, for example, in the information flow, giving the order to 2 submarines to move toward the Russian coast, in reality, that doesn't really say much at all. Why? Because, first of all, some submarines are already near the Russian coast anyway, and submarines, they're like gophers. You can't see them, but they're there. And when, for example, Trump announces that 2 submarines are heading somewhere, that's not really where they are anymore. In other words, they're already positioned, already prepared. It's a way to apply pressure to prompt certain decisions, and also an attempt to rein in Medvedev's rhetoric. Lately, he's having trouble with his tongue. It's gotten too long. He needs a canning machine, or maybe a lip rolling machine, or a tongue rolling machine, or just have it cut off as far as it won't hurt anymore. So most likely Trump is trying to do this to pressure Putin so that he trims Medvedev's tongue a bit. Because joking around with nukes, like Medvedev did, joked in quotes, is absolutely unacceptable, especially the Americans in this regard have a pretty serious number of nuclear warheads, about 5,500. And that's just the ones that are publicly known, along with their delivery systems, including submarines. There are enough missiles in the salvo from just 2 of those submarines, which are designated as RAM. That would be enough to set Russia back for about 30 years, actually. Not a bad result, by the way.
The attack on the Saki base. Is this a tactical or strategic failure for Russia? What does this mean for us? In other words, we are demonstrating our strength and preparing for the deoccupation of the peninsula because it's been a long time since we attacked airfields in Crimea in such a powerful way and without such serious losses. What do you think?
We tried to get there. Well, there were a few strikes on the airfields, actually. There were several hits. We remember the strike on Engels, for example. The SBU did a good job. When they gather a sufficient number of drones, they can take a long time to gather them. So after that, there is specific target designation and pretty good execution of the task, like this time. Saki is located in Crimea. It's in Western Crimea. Basically, it's in the southwestern part of Crimea. So basically, from the standpoint of target designation, it's a pretty good and, in principle, easy target for us. Why? Because approaching from the sea allows you to take out a large number of military facilities. So the question you asked is a good one. Why hasn't it happened before? Why didn't it happen before this? So let's not get too excited yet, so we won't be disappointed later. But if there is systematic work done on the Crimean airfields, there are 5 of them that the Russians use, then believe me, the Russians will lose at least 15 to 20% of their tactical and army aviation, including helicopters stationed there. Well, let's see. We'll keep asking Malyuk for an encore every day, so that he keeps repeating it again and again.
There's a 4-kilometer traffic jam on the Kerch or Crimean bridge. What does that tell us? So as I understand it, there's a manual inspection that takes 7 hours, according to Crimean Wind. Russia is simply in some kind of logistical dead end.
Let me clarify a bit, if you don't mind. The Crimean bridge, not Moscow. If they have a traffic jam from Moscow all the way to the Kerch bridge, believe me, that's not a 7-hour jam. That's a 777-hour jam. It's a big question whether they'll even make it through. The Kerch bridge, which at the moment, well, it's not exactly closed, but there are very strict regulations and security checks on entry and exit right now. And now they're trying to get in. Russians are trying to somehow get through after the curfew, after the destruction of some aviation fuel storage facilities, to be precise. Some are trying on foot, some by car. They're trying to get to Crimea. Naturally, this is causing a traffic jam, and I don't think it's going to clear up until September. It won't clear up. It'll just keep building up. They don't have any other options. Well, there is another option to go to the Caspian, relax there, or to the Aral if it hasn't completely dried up yet.
Dear viewers, please like this video, leave a few kind words for our duo in the comments, and let us know where you're watching from. Also, share your thoughts on how Ukraine's armament, the SBU and other special services are attacking occupied Crimea, targeting military facilities, airfields, aircraft, and the enemy. Let's move on to block number 2. Strikes on logistics and infrastructure. A strike on the Frolovo railway junction, Arcata station, is on fire. What's happening with the railway junctions and logistics? I looked into it. Voronezh, Rostov region, Moscow suburbs. We are attacking railway junctions, military trains. They're burning, fuel tanks are on fire. Roman Grigorievich, the floor is yours.
Well, right now there are mainly two railway junctions that are very important for us, to stop them at least, or at least to slow them down. These are the Volgograd and Rostov junctions. And over the past 2 weeks, our defense forces' long-range strike capabilities have been hitting exactly these two junctions. This is the right move because most of the fuel goes through them, and through the Volgograd junction, fuel and ammunition from Tatarstan are transported. Equipment also comes from the Urals. Well, and then several routes converge at the Rostov railway junction. There, the flows are redistributed. From there, they go either to Melitopol or to Tokmak, to Mariupol, to Berdyansk, to Donetsk, to Volnovakha, and also to Luhansk. All of this passes through Rostov. That's why it's very important for us right now, the second wave. And now it's already started, the second wave, to stop the Russian summer offensive while it's still deep in the rear. And disabling those same traction substations, thermal power plants, balancing capacities, taking out high voltage power lines that supply the railway is very important for us. Why? Because even if there's a delay of just a few hours, the entire delivery schedule gets disrupted. There are certain issues related to loading and unloading there. With the arrival on certain tracks, for example, and all of this gets disrupted for the Russians. We can use long-range strikes, but they definitely need to be scaled up and carried out systematically, just like the strikes on oil refineries and airfields. And then, in principle, we could delay the advance of Russian troops by at least 30%.
Oil depots in Sochi have been hit. The airport is not operating at full capacity. Rosneft, massive explosions. Roman Nikolaevich, we are now gradually starting to attack both oil depots and refineries in remote regions. How much of a systematic strategy is this at the moment for destabilizing the supply across all of Russia?
Well, right now, this system is visible. The main thing is not to abandon it. This has happened so many times already. Last year, our GUR and security service, the drone forces, started destroying the Russian oil industry. And as if by magic, they stopped in May. This year, they also started the destruction from the beginning of the year. They picked up a pretty good pace in March, then stopped. So now we could also pick up the same pace. Basically, if we don't slow down, if, as you rightly say, there's consistency, then by the end of the year, we could cut out at least a third, maybe half of the Russian oil industry. Our long-range strike capabilities can, in principle, easily shut down all the oil refineries. Russian ones, plus the oil terminals and the same Druzhba pipeline. It runs 40 kilometers north of Semenovka. So we have this capability. The main thing is to make sure it isn't stopped, that it isn't stopped now. There have already been several strikes on that base in Sochi. Why is this particular base being targeted? Well, it's kind of a base, but actually it's a fuel and lubricants depot at the Sochi airfield. There's a large amount of aviation kerosene there, mainly, which is also used to refuel army aircraft. Russian ones, these are the helicopters that intercept our drones. For us, it's a purely military target. A military facility. The fact that they have military aircraft stationed at a civilian airfield is their problem, frankly speaking. For us, it's a military target because as soon as the opportunity arises, that aviation kerosene gets subtracted. Although in reality, it could be subtracted even at the refinery. It's not like it just appears out of nowhere from the fourth dimension in their tanks. So now they've set the storage tank on fire. 2,000 tons. So that's a serious fuel storage tank. It will take several months just to restore that one tank, and God willing, a few more will burn through as well at the very least. So if the strikes don't stop, I'll say it again, by the end of the year, the Russians will have a major problem.
A strike on the gas distribution station in Kurgan, gas pipelines in Siberia, in the Moscow region, and those heading towards Central Asia are under attack. These are people who care. Who is doing this, Roman Yegoric, and how important are the strikes on the energy sector today, especially on gas? And again, can these strikes destabilize the supply for all of Central Russia right now?
Well, judging by the geography and the number of gas distribution facilities destroyed recently, stations, and moreover, gas distribution stations are being destroyed near military facilities. In other words, they are either located at or supply military facilities. Our people who care are definitely behind this because it's a gas distribution station. Basically, you could burn it down with just a match. And this stops an entire production cycle if it's a military or industrial facility, or it disrupts certain life support systems of a military facility, if it's a military site not directly involved in production, but still a military one nonetheless. That's why, of course, we will support such actions. And a big thank you to those who care enough not to spare a match. Just one, in order to somehow ease the plight of the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian people by stopping the Russian hydrocarbon industry. That's not a bad move, especially if we're talking about gas distribution stations. And then there are entire routes for transporting gas, Turkmen gas. The one you're talking about now, those are main gas pipelines, so the operation to stop them is more complicated, but still possible. I think, once again, it's our concerned citizens who understand these things very well. I wouldn't rule out that these are local residents because, well, this is from Turkmenistan passing through Kazakhstan. It's quite a large, long pipeline, and in principle, any local resident could stop it. They could stop an entire main gas pipeline. And that's why these concerned people are practically, you could say, our second army. And there are already at least hundreds, if not thousands, of these concerned people.
Roman Nikolaevich, over the past 2 weeks, we've attacked the Leningrad region 3 times already. What exactly is being targeted? Because once again, the Pulkovo airport wasn't operating. It was out of operation for quite a long time. There was a cover plan and drone attacks. Previously, we didn't really attack the Leningrad region. Previously, it was mostly in the Moscow region. If we're talking about the major key cities of Russia, that's St. Petersburg and Moscow. But now, especially after the so-called celebration of the Russian Navy Day on Sunday, when it took place, we began to actively attack the Leningrad region.
Well, it's 1,000 kilometers. The thing is, that's quite a significant range. My fierce ones are going there. For example, the same bomber drones might simply not make it that far. So you need to send pretty serious devices of a certain level there, almost like an airplane, really. But nevertheless, as I understand it, we do have them. Not in large numbers, of course, but we have them, and there are targets to hit there. Well, first of all, the service begins. This is a specific terminal for transferring things like fuel of various types, both gas and oil. And ending with Lenin and Murmansk, if we're talking about that direction, at least to the north. So there are enough military facilities there that our long-range drones will be able to reach. But these are already strategic drones, heavy drones, well, from the point of view of the general classification of drones. Heavy strategic drones for which 1,000 kilometers is not a long distance at all.
When we talk with you, we've also prepared another segment about the panic in Russia's rear. First of all, without a doubt, there are flight delays all over Russia, an aviation collapse that is costing Russia hundreds of millions of dollars. The FSB is jamming communications. A very important point is that regional governors are coming out and saying, Russians, please bear with us for a while, we'll be without communication, without internet. I read that this is already happening in 5 regions. 5 governors have made such statements. The FSB is holding a meeting. Putin is summoning the Minister of Transport because logistics are being disrupted. Again, there are 30-kilometer traffic jams at the Crimean bridge, inspections lasting up to 7 hours, and not just there. Flight delays, chaos in Tula is growing, panic among civilians. In your opinion, can we call this a managed crisis in the rear of the Russian Federation, and how long can Russia withstand this pace of chaos?
Well, it's hardly being managed exactly. That is, it's an attempt to create chaos, and as for how to manage that chaos, the Russians will figure it out themselves, because in some areas they have competent leaders, and in others they have utterly clueless ones who sometimes even end up jumping out of windows, screaming and swearing, "Why did you throw me out?" But nevertheless, everyone saw this perfectly well and understands how it works. This is how Russian special services handle these kinds of issues. So, this chaos, which in the end, at the very least, hits the Russian economy, because any, say, air transportation or railway transportation, they operate on a certain schedule. If the schedule is disrupted somewhere in one place, it practically shuts down the entire profit-making mechanism along the whole chain, or at the very least, even leads to losses as such. That's why this may not be a direct action. Ours, specifically, is not a direct action, but it is essentially a side reaction and a secondary effect that comes from using our military drones against Russian military targets. And at the same time, naturally, any Russian mechanisms of movement come to a halt for various reasons, one of which is, at least presumably, the infliction of damage. So let it be. Basically, if it keeps shaking, eventually it will shake itself apart and collapse. After all, the Russian Empire, the Russian Federation, at this point, it's a colossus with feet of clay. For Russia, that's its economy. And as soon as you undermine the economy, it will collapse. This colossus will crumble just as the Soviet Union once did, for the very same reason, an economic one. So the more chaos there is, even uncontrolled chaos for all I care, the main thing is that it leads to the collapse of the Russian Empire.
Roman Egorovich, the USA, Trump, and nuclear signals. So once again, let's make sure to discuss this with you. Donald Trump brought up the readiness of US nuclear submarines. And in general, he's ready for nuclear war. That's a very serious statement. I don't know how much of it is just empty talk, because when Donald Trump makes such statements that the US is ready for nuclear war, what kind of consequences should we expect after those words? Peskov responds, in a nuclear war, there are no winners. The Kremlin has sharply changed its tone from threats to justifications. And here's the question. Is this a political game or is it a real signal from the US? What should we be preparing for? And why did Moscow change its rhetoric?
Well, the thing is, Medvedev went too far. We've already talked about this. Medvedev went overboard, provoking Trump in this sense, and Trump got tired of it. After all, he's quite impulsive. Most likely, he woke up on the wrong side of the bed that morning and naturally acted impulsively. He sent 2 submarines to the shores of Russia, though in reality, no one told him that they were already off the Russian coast. They just said, all right, let's go. They set out to carry out a combat mission. After all, this is one of the main ones. Branches of the American nuclear triad are based on submarines. Naturally, just the very movement in this direction puts pressure on Russia. It's clear that Medvedev has now been pushed under the baseboard somewhere. He won't be barking anymore. He won't be making any noise in the near future. But this whole issue definitely needs to be played out. That's why Peskov, Putin, and maybe others had to start squirming in place. But Peskov is the main one. Most likely coming up next, the tired old horse should come out on stage too. He'll have his little spats as well, I mean Lavrov. So they'll play it out. They'll calm Trump down regarding actions against Medvedev. They probably won't bring up Medvedev and nuclear issues anymore. Or they won't, or at least they'll explain that it shouldn't be done.
In your opinion, how much of a deterrent force is the United States Navy today, in your view?
The US Navy is, of course, the largest. There are certain problems there. Right now, real problem. It needs to be modernized. It needs to be restructured in some areas. Why? Because everyone now clearly understands that drones, not just aerial, but also underwater and surface drones, are a major problem for any navy at all. And now every navy in the world will have to deal with this problem. And those who don't have a navy will be rubbing their hands, realizing that it was the right decision not to invest in one, as they say. Once upon a time, someone remembers, there is also Rakin, when he had such an interesting reprise about dinosaurs. He once said, where are these dinosaurs? Where are these 6-story fools? They disappeared all this time. And Klopik survived. So here is the same story. Now all these 6-story fools, meaning the same fleet, they are a very good target for small, inexpensive means of destruction of various types. That's why they either need to be completely rebuilt, for example, by reinforcing carrier groups with certain mechanisms, or say hidden, just like the Russian Black Sea Fleet is doing now. They simply hid themselves, started behaving like those dinosaurs, like little bugs, crawling under the baseboards in Novorossiysk and sitting there quietly. Rarely, and when they do come out, it's mostly the submarines that try to take a shot. With 4-caliber missiles, that's the kind of mechanism we're talking about. And now the United States, having a serious thorn in their side, will have to think about what to do with it. The only way to use the fleet is as an aircraft carrier fleet. We're talking about aircraft carriers, which on the one hand can now be seriously protected even just by distance and can provide the opportunity for planes or missiles to take off and carry out their combat mission. But these are now Pentagon strategies to restructure them.
Roman Egorovich, here's a very interesting thought. It appeared in the text and information surfaced in the media space that this tsunami in Kamchatka and then the volcanic eruption in Kamchatka, well, at first the tsunami was actually a test. Some believe these were unsuccessful Russian tests, while others say the Americans were conducting the tests. And accordingly, as a result, there was a tsunami in Kamchatka, and moreover, information emerged that there were damages. A pier or something more than a pier at the nuclear submarine bases of the Russian Federation was affected. As a military analyst, how would you assess this information? Only it could correspond to reality.
but it's unlikely that this was due to external interference. Well, it's unlikely, and here's why. First of all, Kamchatka is a fault zone, or rather, it's an area of tectonic convergence. It's a serious seismic zone. You'd have to be completely brainless to build submarine bases there with nuclear weapons. Well, the Russians went a bit overboard with that. Not there, maybe somewhere else, but definitely not there. There are serious earthquakes there and naturally tsunamis as well. These are some of the consequences of earthquakes, including volcanic eruptions. So it's all interconnected. The overall picture is that any external interference with seismic centers has already been mapped out. That's why it's unlikely to be external, specifically external pressure. But here we're also talking about the office, meaning God's office. He could have intervened, could have stepped in and put the Russians in their place a bit. There's been too much grief lately, too many curses upon Russian heads. And in the end, yes, the Heavenly Office records all of this, and then a decision is made and the plate is shifted, as they say. It's unlikely that the Americans can return there.
Roman Lenkovich, for the finale, has prepared an important topic: a new command for the Air Force and Armed Forces of Ukraine. President Zelensky has appointed Anatoly Krivonoshko as the new commander of the Ukrainian Air Force. Before this, he spent a year performing duties to strengthen the air component, especially air defense and drones. What do you think this appointment will change? Already before Europe? Can we expect a tougher approach in the skies?
The appointment has already been in place for a year. First of all, the right decision was made a year ago. For a year, you and I, probably before this appointment, kept saying that it was absolutely necessary that the head of the Air Force, that is the commander-in-chief, should be a pilot. So they listened, yes, they listened, though only after we lost our heroic pilot in the 16th. They listened, yes, they replaced him, and again they appointed an acting commander. Then they observed how a pilot could handle the air defense system, and it was decided that indeed pilots can handle it. Moreover, now the air component is becoming the main focus even within the air defense system, not to mention certain offensive aspects. Therefore, naturally, after the decision was made, there was an actual appointment. A pilot was made the commander-in-chief. Now, the question is about the next steps. That is, simply replacing the commander with a pilot, or rather appointing a pilot as commander-in-chief, is not enough. We need to restructure our entire Air Force system to fit the flight mission. That means all the heads of the air defense commands, all the chiefs in the management hierarchy, at least as far as the air forces are concerned, we need to appoint flight personnel. This is very important because right now at this moment, that's only half the job. Right now, it's only half done. We need to see this through to the end and replace the entire hierarchy. In the air forces, replace them with flight personnel. Only then can we say that our air forces will not only be a serious defensive mechanism, but also a serious offensive force, which is what they should be. Because in the third millennium, the air component is the main paradigm for carrying out offensive operations.
Roman Grigorievich, should we expect a transfer from our allies, specifically the JASSM missiles? Taurus missiles, other missiles, Tomahawks, of course, ultimately.
Well, Tomahawks, probably not so much. After all, it's about the launch platforms. Only our Typhoons can be used for that. Although a few Tomahawks could be used purely for demonstration, nothing more. But I repeat once again, we don't have the means to launch them. These are either submarines, torpedo tubes, or vertical launchers on submarines like the Mark 45. There are such silos. The launchers or the shipborne Mk-41 launcher have 64 silos. But that's from a ship, and it's unlikely anyone would give us a ship, for example, to bury it here like they did in concrete. In Romania and Poland, it's too lengthy a process to launch missiles from there, so there's only one mechanism left for that. These are the Typhoon or Typhoon launchers, as they're sometimes called, but that's just how the name is translated for the launchers. Typhoon, well, first of all, there are a lot of them. Theoretically, purely theoretically, of course, they could give us Tomahawks, but I'll say it again, that's purely for intimidation. Here, there's more hope for our own ballistic missiles. We can produce them ourselves. The question is for the authorities, where have they been for the past 7 years? But for example, when it comes to JASSMs and Taurus missiles, there's definitely more hope here, because in and of themselves, the F-16S are carriers of cruise missiles, and at this stage at least, that's their main role. Given the reality of the enemy's strong air defense and sufficient numbers of surface-to-air missile systems and aircraft, the optimal use of the F-16 is precisely as a launch platform for joint air-to-surface standoff missile. JASSM missiles have a range from 370 to 980 kilometers. Again, logic suggests that we should get them. So for now, all we can do is wait for them at the very least. We'll see what Trump does, depending on which foot he gets up on and where. Because when it comes to the JASSM issue, it's definitely Trump who has to make the decision, or will have to, if it comes to that. And as for the Taurus issue, that's a question for Merz and Germany, of course. But again, there's a connection to the Americans there. After all, the Taurus missile, which flies at extremely low altitudes, relies on what's called a digital terrain map, which at the moment only the Americans have. Therefore, without transferring the digital terrain map, this missile will be an easy target at higher altitudes and won't be able to accomplish its combat mission. So once again, everything depends on the Americans in every respect. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens, even if things aren't off to a good start. Dear viewers,
please like this video and leave a few kind words for our team in the comments. Roman Egorovich and I work together several times a week, definitely more than 3 times, as you can see. In the comments, let us know where you're watching from, share the geography of our viewers, and write a few words of support for the armed forces of Ukraine and well-known military analysts. Roman Svitan, Roman Egorovich, thank you. And as usual, see you again on Wednesday.
goodbye.